Hello, my name is Emma Snape, Special Event and Program Manager for the Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage. On behalf of everyone at the museum, welcome to our virtual program, My Story, Erika Gold and Helen Marks with Sarah Weiss. This program is inspired by our newest special exhibition, Notorious RBG, The Life and Times of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, presented locally by PNC Bank. Thank you to PNC, to all of our sponsors and partners, including today's programming partner, the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center, who helped make it possible to bring a first-of-its-kind exhibition like this one to Cleveland. The exhibition is open now, and we're welcoming visitors to join us safely in person, Wednesday through Sunday, from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're using best practice protocols, such as contactless time ticketing, wearing masks, and maintaining social distancing to ensure a safe visiting experience. Of course, we also welcome you to explore the Notorious RBG from the comfort of home. On the first and third Tuesday of the month, at 2 p.m., we offer a virtual online tour of the exhibit, or you can bring a group for a private online experience. Whichever way you prefer to explore the exhibit, you can learn more about ways to connect through our website, www.maltzmuseum.org. Thank you for joining us today as part of the My Story series, a monthly conversation between exceptional local Cleveland women who have paved their own path, simultaneously paving the way for others by breaking down barriers to live and work with passion and purpose. In today's program, in honor of Yom Hashoah, Holocaust survivors Erika Gold and Helen Marks will be telling their stories in conversation with the executive director of the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center, Sarah Weiss. To introduce Sarah Weiss really briefly, she joined the staff of the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center in 2004 and was appointed executive director in 2007. Outside of the Holocaust and Humanity Center, she served as the director of Jewish Community Relations Council at the Jewish Federation of Cincinnati from 2011 to 2017. And most recently, in 2019, she successfully led the Holocaust and Humanity Center's groundbreaking move to Cincinnati's historic Union Terminal. And now, without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Sarah Weiss to the virtual stage to introduce Erika and Helen.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you for that kind introduction. And the Holocaust and Humanity Center is really thrilled and honored to be in partnership with the Maltz Museum on this program and many, many other programs. I want to also mention before we get started that I also have a special connection to Cleveland, and that my grandparents, who are Holocaust survivors, actually lived in Cleveland for many, many years. So I feel very connected to the community there and the museum there, and I'm honored to be part of this program and be introducing Erika Gold and Helen Marks, who we'll see come up on the screen momentarily. These are two women who are both Holocaust survivors who have been for many years in Cleveland dedicated to sharing their stories, to volunteerism, to community service, to giving back in so many ways. And I'm really honored to be with them and to be in dialogue with them today. They're going to share a bit more about their experiences during the war, and we're going to cover a lot of their story through the conversation. But I will share, in addition to what I mentioned about their volunteerism and their commitment to sharing their stories as part of the Maltz Museum and other institutions in Cleveland, they each have unique stories and experiences as children during the Holocaust. And immigrated to the United States, Helen Marks came to Cleveland in 1947, and Erika Gold came shortly thereafter in 1950. Since arriving in the US, both have gone on to rebuild their lives, have families, grandchildren, given back to the community. And I want to invite them to share in their own words, their stories to begin the conversation. Erika, will you start by sharing your story with us?
Sure. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I'm going to just say, to start out with the fact that I was born in Budapest, Hungary. And Hungary was the last country that the Germans occupied. So for a while I was okay. I was unfortunately born 5 months before Hitler came to power. So my whole childhood was although I was okay as a little kid, but I knew a lot. I'm an only child. I spent a lot of time with my parents, and I know they were listening to the radio Free Europe, which was against the law. It was on the shortwave radio. And I had to be very quiet and I couldn't tell anybody. So that wasn't a good thing. I heard Hitler on the radio shouting, and you didn't have to know German to know that whatever he said was not good. So, but I knew that people were taken away from places and they disappeared and you never heard from them again. But that's about the extent. But then in 1944, March 19th, the Germans came and occupied Hungary. And by that time, they were very good in knowing how to get rid of people the easiest, fastest way. So what they have done in Poland in 5 years, they accomplished in Hungary in less than 2 months, which most people have a hard time understanding that this can really happen, but it did. As a matter of fact, there was an exhibit at the Maltz Museum maybe 3 years ago about Adolf Eichmann. He was one of the architects of the final solution, and he was the one who was in charge of the transports. And he was very good what he was doing. So in the exhibit, one of the things was there is a little plaque that he received from the German government in November 1944, complimenting him that he was able to transport 400,000 Hungarian Jews to the camp in less than 2 months. So it's written by the German, not me. So anyway, so that's what happened. So when they came in on the 19th of March, by the 1st of April, all the Jews had to wear a yellow star. And it had to be a certain shade of yellow, it was a certain size, it was made a certain way. And I don't know how, but we all had it. Couldn't go out on the street without it. And people were very optimistic. They were always hoping that everything is gonna turn out okay. And they said, you know, so we wear a yellow star, no big deal. But it was a big deal because all the laws that came out after that was for the people with the yellow star, had to do this or couldn't do that. So right away in the beginning of April, my grandfather, who they lived about 2 hours north of Budapest near the Slovak border near Bratislava, but it was Hungary, sent a message that they're going to had to move because a German officer needed their home. And they moved in with another family, and he said that as long as they leave a roof over our heads, we'll be okay. And that's all we knew. I don't know if they had to move again or if there was a ghetto or what happened. At the same time, another law came out that non-Jews could not work for Jews. And I always wondered about why that was a good thing, because these people lost their jobs. But anyway, that's what happened. We had a housekeeper at our apartment who was not Jewish. She had to leave and get her own place. And my dad had a clerk in his store that wasn't Jewish, and he had to leave, but that it didn't make any difference because he had to close the store and report to a forced labor camp. So he was there. My mother and I'm an only child, but my mother and I were in the apartment. And then in June, we heard again from my grandfather when they were being taken away. And as it turned out, they were taken to Auschwitz. One of the things that bothers me, the older I get, the worse it gets. The fact that these people were stuffed into cattle cars. Those were not trains, they were cattle cars. And nobody objected. Those people who were their neighbors, some friends, and nobody said a word. So that was, but we did not know that. So all we knew that they were being taken somewhere. And that was in June. By July 1st, all the small towns and villages in Hungary was cleared out of Jews. There wasn't any anywhere. And except in Budapest. And it's a bigger city. They probably felt that it's gonna take them longer to get us together. But after all the other ones were gone, they were going to concentrate on us. By the way, what I didn't mention that we found out afterwards, of course, is that all the Hungarian Jews were taken straight to Auschwitz. And then they were separated there. And that was Dr. Mengele, who was in charge of separating the people. And anybody he felt could work went on one side. Anybody that he felt was too young, too old, too sickly looking, or a woman with a child went on the other side. And unfortunately, that other side was the gas chamber. And then, of course, after that, they were taken to the crematorium. They say it took about 2 hours, an hour and a half to 2 hours from the time the train stopped. Everybody got separated, and they were gassed and cremated, and thousands of people were just gone. I mean, it's hard to believe that human beings can do this to other human beings. And that's the reason we talk about it, because it was so horrific that it should never, ever happen again. So, as I mentioned, my mother and I were alone in the apartment in Budapest. And then in July, they decided that they're going to have the certain buildings where Jews could live, and other buildings were off limits. The building we lived in was off limits, but we could move into one of the buildings where my mother's aunt lived, and we moved in there. At that point, the Nazis wanted each room to be occupied by a family, not a person, but a family. And to make it worse, the way they counted the rooms, if you had a bedroom, a dining room, a kitchen, and a bath, that was considered as 4 rooms. So 4 whole families had to occupy that space. So it was pretty crowded, but since we were related, it was a little easier than if we were total strangers. At that point, we could only go out on the street like 2 hours a day, in the morning at 8 to 10, and go just to the market. It was the summer, fresh fruits and vegetables were plentiful, and the Jews were not allowed to have anything else. We didn't get meat or chicken or flour or sugar, no dairy products. I received 2 ounces of milk a week because I was under the age of 12. So that was my only nourishment. So my mother took me every day to the market, and that's what we lived on. But it was very boring and it was awful. But then in October 15th, a new regime came in. The Arrow Cross took over because they felt that the other Nazis are not getting rid of us fast enough, and they were going to change that. So by that time, all the men of working age were in some kind of a camp situation. So there were only women, children, and old people. So they called all the women of a certain age, working age. They had to report to this big sporting arena. And the Nazis had no idea how many people are going to show up because people followed the rules. And so the certain age women, they all went there. And since the Nazis and the Germans always wanted everything to be recorded, everybody had to have a paper, everybody had to be registered. And at that point they had, everybody was, they were writing handwritten notes, handwritten certificates, and it was very detailed. It was neat, and it had a lot of information, and everybody had to have it. And fortunately, by the end of the day, they were not done. So they said anybody who is not registered can go home and they'll be called another time. At that point, and that was good because my mother was not registered and she was able to come home, but she right away said, if they call again, she's not going. She has to figure out something else, but she's not going back there. So she found out that there was a factory near Budapest that was making soldier uniforms, which is important for the war effort. So if we can get in there, they'll save us. And so we were lucky, we got in there, and we never went outside. We worked during the day in the factory, and at night we slept on the factory floor on the soldier uniforms. And that's how we existed there. While we were there, my dad sent a message that he's going to be, they are going to be taken away somewhere, and he wanted us to know. At that point, my mother found out that there were neutral country diplomats in Budapest trying to save the remaining Jews of Europe because we were it. And they were giving out protective papers. They actually bought big apartment buildings, put the Jews in, and put their flag on, hoping that that will save them. So my mother got a paper for my dad. It was sent to him. We had no idea if he got it, and if it did any good. All we knew that it was sent. Now, talking about the diplomats, at this point, I have to mention the fact that there were more diplomats than just the two in Hungary. They were all over Europe trying to do the same thing against their own government. So they never talked about it until either they got very, very old or they passed away and the family found the papers. In 2005, there was a big exhibit at the Cleveland Public Library called Visas for Life. By that time, there were over 100 of these diplomats who were recognized. And when Israel built their Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem, in Jerusalem, they right away put up a garden, and each tree had the name of one of these righteous Gentiles, mostly the diplomats who saved the Jews. Fortunately, they ran out of space, and that's the last number I heard. They started putting up plaques. There were 25,000 plaques that they were doing the same thing. They were saving the Jews that they might not even have known because they felt it was the right thing to do. And they were heroes. And today, for the commemoration of Yad Vashem, we are honoring those people who saved us. Sorry. So So anyway, at that point, we were still working at the factory, and we received the paper. I don't know if we actually got there on November 14th or they gave it to us a little later, but it must have been close, as I remember. So we got our paper that we belong to that factory on the 14th of November. The 1st of December, the Nazis came and took us all away. There were 300 women and children in this group who were all taken away. Some of us were on trucks, other people were walking and not knowing where we're gonna end up. It was a Friday afternoon, it was getting dusk, and we arrived this very busy marketplace. Everybody was doing their weekend shopping, so there were a lot of people there, but the Nazis said, we're going to stop here and nobody should get out of line or get off the trucks. With that, the truck that my mother and I were on stopped. She jumped off, she winked at me, I jumped after her, and we walked away. Obviously, nobody saw us or cared. So we walked away. By that time, we knew where our housekeeper lived, who was a wonderful person. Her name was Erika, and she lived there with her daughter, who was my age. She actually brought me up, so we were very close. So we went there. My mother asked if we could come in for a couple of days to see if we can figure out something else to do. And she let us in. She was a hero, because if anybody would have known we're there, all four of us would have been shot on the spot. So it was an amazing thing for her to do. Fortunately, there was no place to go. So we kind of got stuck there. Whenever her sister used to come to just drop in, we had to hide because she didn't trust her sister enough to let her know that we're there, because she could have given us away. So we stayed there and not going out, not going anywhere. So after then, January 15th, fortunately, the Russian army came and liberated us, which made us very happy. It was great. But we stayed there because we didn't know what was going on outside. And then a miracle happened 3 days later. On the 18th of January, my dad came and found us. And that's when we found out that the so-called Schutzpass from the Swiss government got to him. He was already in the cattle car, and the Nazi who got the paper called him out and let him go. By that time, there was a ghetto in Budapest, and that's where he survived the remaining time. Now, because of the fact the Budapest is made out of two cities, Buda and Pest. Fortunately, we were on the Pest side, which is on the east side where the Russians were coming from. So was the ghetto. And when they got to the ghetto and liberated the ghetto, the whole side of that, the Pest side got liberated. Then the Germans blew up all the bridges on the Danube, and it held up the Russian army 30 days before they could cross the river. But we were okay. We were, I mean, relatively saying it was, we could walk around. And as soon as my dad came to find us, we went back to our old apartment, hoping that we can go back. And because of the fact that it was the top floor of a big apartment house, nobody wanted to occupy that space because of all the bombings. So it was exactly how we left it. Nobody was in there, nobody touched anything. So whatever we left there was still there. So I, at that point, we went in, but all the windows were broken because of the bombs. And it was the middle of January, so it was cold. Fortunately, we forgot to close one window, which happened to be in the bathroom. My parents pulled in one of these pull-out couches. They slept on that. I slept in the bathtub. We had no food, no gas, no electricity, no running water, but we were free. And when you're free, then things get better. And the Russians were going west. The Allies were going east, liberating the different towns and countries as they were going along, including the camps, the concentration camps. And when the people came back from the concentration camps, that's when we actually found out all the horrible, horrible things that happened there, and all the people that we could never expect to come back. So I can stop here. I just want to mention one other thing, because it was on Facebook just 2 days ago. At the bank of the Danube, if anybody's been in Budapest, there is a monument for the people who got shot into the Danube. And they have a bunch of shoes that, not real shoes, but it's made of cement or bronze or whatever. But when the diplomats put the people in the buildings that they owned, some of the Nazis didn't believe that, and they took the people out. They took them to the Danube. They tied 3 people together in order to save bullets. They shot the middle one, and all 3 fell in. And that's what the monument is about.
Erika, thank you so much for sharing. I know it's not easy to condense a story that you usually tell in much more time. And I know it's particularly difficult as we're marking Holocaust Remembrance Day. And as I think about this program being in conjunction with the RBG exhibit, I think about the chutzpah, or the strength of your mother in deciding to jump off the truck and encouraging you to do so. And I think if we think about the strength of women, wow, that's a story that exemplifies that. So we'll talk more, but let's hear from Helen about her experiences as a young child during the war.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to share my story. My story is kind of different because I was what was called a hidden child. The numbers, I'm sure you've heard that the 6 million Jews that were killed, 1.5 million were children. Of the children who survived in Europe, only 10 to 15,000 survived, and I obviously was one of them. And one of my thoughts from the time I could be a little more philosophical, I always wondered why I had survived and so many had not. And I kind of came to the conclusion several years ago that perhaps because my purpose is to tell my story, not because I myself am that important, but I put a face to the general numbers that were pushed out. At any rate, I was born in Belgium in 1941. When we have younger kids, I tell them that means I'm 39 and a half, but they don't do mental math, so it works out pretty well. My parents had come from Czechoslovakia to Belgium for a bunch of reasons, and they did not speak Flemish, which is one of the languages in Belgium. The other language is French, which I'm sure you've heard of. My father, being that he didn't speak the language and had to support a wife, went to work as a furniture mover for a man who owned a warehouse. He was strong, not too tall, but he was very strong. And that worked out till he learned the language. And then he became a tailor and a furrier. And At year 1.5, I had a fur coat, as did my mother. And the war, though, had already started in 1939, although in 1938 with Kristallnacht, November 9th, 1938, with the destruction of all the Jewish homes and businesses, that was kind of an appetizer, if you will, to the war. My parents came, as I said, from Czechoslovakia. They were married in 1939. I was born in 1941. And in 1942, in August, in the middle of the night, the Nazis invaded our area with very large guns, yelling, "Juden raus," Jews out. They said we were going to be relocated, a euphemism that was used often to kind of calm people down. And they were told to pack one suitcase. My mother, sorry about that. My mother did not have anything of great value, but she did have a lot of sentimental things. And so she packed 2 suitcases. So she here is a 5-foot woman, maybe 5'1". She's carrying a fat little baby, 2 suitcases, wearing a fur coat and carrying a baby with a fur coat. And we were pushed and shoved into various, I don't know, trains, trucks, whatever we were pushed into. And we went one direction. My father and the older boys were taken in another direction, but before my parents were separated, they were able to tell each other that should they be able to contact each other or should they need to contact each other, they could contact the furniture warehouse owner, as he did not, he was not Jewish, so he would not be taken away. My father was taken to various concentration camps, Buchenwald, Jabeschowitz, Bergen-Belsen. He ended up eventually in Birkenau, Auschwitz. And at first, being that he spoke 8 languages, he was a translator. Unfortunately, that did not last very long, and he was put to work in the coal mines. The coal mines were brutal. They were not fed properly. The guards were absolutely just horrible. And but my father worked very hard. At one point, his arm broke, and he knew that if he went to the so-called hospital, those were emptied out periodically, and the people in the hospital were sent to the gas chambers. So he happened to find a can, like a metal can, wrapped it around his arm with a piece of wire, and went back to work. It has been established that a normal, healthy person needs 2,200 calories a day to maintain their weight and health. It has been determined that the inmates of the concentration camps, if they were lucky, got 104 calories per day. Needless to say, starvation was rampant. My father did not talk about his experiences, too ugly, too egregious, too heinous, but he did share one happening with my mother, which I heard years later. He had decided to commit suicide. The brutality, the hunger, all the horrible conditions that he couldn't take anymore. What he did or planned to do was take a blanket with him, go near the electrified fence that surrounded the concentration camp, and walk into it, walk into the electrified fence, and there would be instant electrocution. As it turns out, he had an epiphany. He saw me as a young woman under a chuppah, underneath a wedding canopy. That was pretty imaginative, because the last time he saw me, I was 1.5 years old, mop of black hair, a fat little baby. And here I was, a young woman under a chuppah, but that prevented his committing suicide. My father, like the other men and women, were numbered because the Nazis were fanatic about keeping track of bodies that were alive and dead. On the inside of his left arm, he was 70804. If you put a comma after the O, you know that he was the 70,804th person. Underneath the numbers, there was a triangle, and the triangle represented part of a Jewish star, Star of David, and his crime, he was a Hebrew or an Israelite. We have a document from the Nazis. When he entered Auschwitz, it said he weighed 174 pounds. When he left, he weighed 95 pounds. Needless to say, he was what the Nazis called a Muselmann, a skeleton man. He survived, and that is his part of the story. My mother's part of the story was she and I were taken to a processing camp in Malines, which is the French name for Mechelen, which is the Flemish name. And everybody there was processed. For the most part, all of the women and children who went there were sent straight for extermination because, as Hitler had said, Jews were vermin, subhuman, not worthy of breathing the air. The only good thing about them was that they were going to provide him artifacts for a museum of an extinct race. Jews, incidentally, as you know, are not a race. They are a culture and a religion, and they come in all kinds of colors. At any rate, we were there for 3 days, not given any food or water. And it was my mother's turn to be processed. She walked in there with attitude. My mother was never particularly dramatic or having the urge to become an actress, but she put on a royal performance. She walked in there angry. How dare he have her here? Her husband was working for the Nazis. Yes, but not voluntarily. And she also spoke to him in Hungarian. She also spoke 8 languages well. She did speak German very well, but for some reason she thought if she spoke Hungarian, it was more of an indication that she was of an allied country with Germany, because Hungary was on Germany's side. And she just ranted and raved at this man, a Nazi commander. At any rate, my mother always said I was born lucky, and the reason that we were able to get out because I was lucky. At any rate, she asked if she could leave to go back to Antwerp to get her papers, fake news, and then she'd come back, more fake news. And could she take one suitcase? Take them both, he said. And here we were, 2 fur-clad people in August, that was hotter than Hades, on public transportation. And interestingly, nobody approached us because we looked like crazy people. So we went back to Antwerp, and there my mother tried to bribe people with products and items that she had in her apartment to hide us or to share ration coupons with us. But people are very big on self-preservation. And after a while, nobody wanted to do that because there was just no reward. You were killed if you were caught harboring a Jew. And my mother asked the warehouse person if we could stay in his warehouse. By this time, it was cold. It was winter, no heat, no running water, and I got sick. There would be no doctor for a sick Jewish child. My mother wanted more than anything in her life to have her child survive. She contacted a cousin. Cousin was Jewish, but her husband was not. So it was assumed that the couple was not Jewish. And the cousin, I'm not going to give you all the names and all the languages that we go through. The cousin would be known as Sam, and he had a connection with a teaching hospital where they taught midwives, young women who would learn to deliver babies. His connection was Sister Rose, the nun who was the director of the hospital. And Sister Rose asked Gilberte Delfos if her parents would possibly hide a Jewish child. When she went home for the weekend, she lived at the hospital during the week. She asked her parents, Gaston and Gabrielle Delfos, if they would take in a Jewish child. The couple were good Catholics in the best sense of the word. They did not believe that war should be made on children, and they agreed. And so my mother and I went to the village, the farming community of Hanu. And when we got there, we had a major problem. By this time, I'm close to 3 years old, very verbal in Flemish. The Delfosse family speaks only French. And my mother, with no explanation, leaves. And here I am with a family I've never met, that I can't talk to. And the only person I've ever known in my whole life has betrayed me and left. One of my daughters is a school psychologist, and she explained that between the ages of 2 and 3 is when children learn to trust. And I learned immediately, you don't trust anybody because you can't even trust your mother. At any rate, I was taken to these people's home. They had a brick house. They had a little store that was pretty empty and a little barn with a couple of sheep. And years later, because I've been back to Belgium a bunch of times, I asked Gilbert, I said, what did we do about the language problem? And she laughed and she said, Maman, her mother, cried every night till you learn to speak French. And I said, well, how long did that take? And she laughed. She said, 15 days. So I learned to speak French pretty quickly. And being that nobody explained things to me, and I was a very curious child, as also a curious adult, I came up with the fact that Gaston would be my papa, Gabrielle, my maman, my mommy, and this woman who kept showing up is my mother. And my mother showed up several times. Gaston and a friend of his who lived in Antwerp, who was a photographer, managed somehow, at the risk of their lives, to steal empty fake documents. And they gave this to my mother, who would now become Bertha Laguesse. And with these papers, she was safe from being identified as a Jew. My mother came several times to visit me, and being that I had been dumped by this woman, I was not warm and loving, and I was speaking French, so why bother speaking Flemish? And my mother said, she's here. And I said, tant pis, so what? Not very nice. But at any rate, my mother came one time and crossed the Battle of the Bulge. As I explained to people, Weight Watchers had nothing to do with this. It had nothing to do with calories. It had to do with a phalanx of army people, soldiers who formed a sort of rounded bulge to push forward. She crossed the lines of the Allied soldiers, American, British, and Canadian, and she was caught. Not a good place to be, because they assumed she was a spy, because nobody would cross fighting lines unless he or she were a spy. She tried to explain, she did not speak American or anything else, or French at that time. She tried to explain with a picture of me that she was trying to go to see her daughter. One soldier looked ready to shoot her down. The other two, it's kind of tacky to shoot a woman. And they figured she'd be hit by bullets anyway, and they let her go. Sorry about that. Anyway, the situation was that, she came to see me 5 separate times, and the reception wasn't great. I was presented as the daughter of cousins who lived in the city, because in the cities were bombed. None of the enemy fighters wants to bomb carrots or sheep or whatever. And so I was supposed to be safer with this family in a farm area. I had a cross. I learned my Hail Marys, Our Fathers, the whole Catholic catechism. And if there were no soldiers or bombs on Sunday, we went to church. One time the Nazi tanks came through our village, and Gaston said, we have to hide. And we went to hide in a cellar. Now, a cellar is not a basement, no rugs, no lamps. It is a big dirt hole in the ground, and it's fairly cool. It's lined with straw, and it usually has root vegetables in there. Gaston, Gabrielle, and one of the neighbors who also provided me with food came in there, and and Gaston closed the door inside. And we heard the tanks come. We stopped breathing. I know you can't do that, but we couldn't hear anybody breathing. And one of the young soldiers came to the cellar, started trying to open the door. Not that he wanted a healthy snack of carrots, but he knew that the farmers made liquor. Luckily, his commanding officer called him away, and we kept on not breathing till all of them left. Another time when the tanks were coming through, Gaston heard that they were going to look for Jewish children in these farm villages, and he knew we had to get away. So he put me on the handlebars of his bicycle. Gabriel packed a big basket of food, and we went to the local newspaper where he used to work as a typesetter. We went down in the basement so we could turn on the lights, and we were there for 3 days. Years later, I asked Gilbert, it's really weird. I don't remember not knowing how to read. And she said, you remember when you went with Gaston and he told you we're going on a picnic? Of course, I didn't know what a picnic was. And you were there in the basement with all the type. You learned to read. I asked also if there had been any other Jewish children in Hanu, and she said no. I was the only one, but in the next village over, there were 3, and they were ratted out basically to the Nazis and taken away. And so we managed to survive. And when the war was over, my mother contacted the warehouse person. My father had contacted him, and we were able to get together. By 1947, the papers that my aunt and uncle in California were able to send out to sponsor us to come to America came, and we went to California. I was not happy to get aboard the USS Oregon, but my mother told me we would come back to Belgium in 14 days. Now, on the 11th day, and we hit Ellis Island, I spiked a fever because I was very upset. The nuns again helped us and gave me aspirins, or we'd still be stuck at Ellis Island. However, we were still not free from anti-Semitism. One day I was walking along a hill with a cousin, and I saw a blackout shade that was used during the war. I heard an airplane, and I hit the side of a hill. Put my arms over my head, scrunched up into a small ball, and my cousin stood there laughing at the idiot who was doing something really strange. Lots of anti-Semitism still followed us, and we came with very few possessions, but lots of fear, lots of nightmares. My parents had PTSD, but we didn't have any fancy words for it. When my mother passed away many years later, we found an X under her bed because she was still afraid of the Nazis. At any rate, we came to America. My sister was born in 1949. By this time, my father's low-paying job in California was not good for 4 people. We came to Cleveland, 1951. The people who, my mother's relatives who had survived, out of the 10 children, she and 2 sisters and a brother were the only ones who survived. Her parents and all the others were slaughtered. At any rate, we came to Cleveland. My parents scrimped and saved, got a little house in Shaker Heights on one of the streets that Shaker keeps trying to give back to Cleveland because it doesn't fit their image. I guess that's what it is. And but I got an excellent education. I was lucky. I went to Oberlin College. I got married shortly afterwards. My husband and I have 4 adult children, and they are all married. And I have 10 grandchildren, 2 dogs, and a couple of cats. And that is my story.
Thank you, Helen. I'm also inspired by your mom's strength and perseverance. And, when I think about both you and Erika as young children, your lives being uprooted by hate, and, experiencing so much loss and unknown and confusion and changing places, I think about your resilience. And I know that actually one of our attendees pointed that out as well, as the resilience in your stories and the resilience we see in survivors generally. But you mentioned, Helen, your mother keeping an axe under her bed. I'm wondering for both you and Erika, how it shaped your outlook on life, how your experiences as a child shaped you, impacted you, had an impact on the way you viewed the world. Erika, do you want to start for us?
Maybe I'm a little bit more aware of politics, and because Helen doesn't remember what was happening. She just knows as a very little kid, but I was old enough to know that how bad the situation was. I didn't understand why. I knew it had to do with our religion, and I could not understand. Like this one time, I had to wear the yellow star in Budapest, and our housekeeper was still with us. And my mother asked her to go and buy me some shoes, which I guess we have done in the past. And so we went on the streetcar, and there was only one seat left. And she sat down and she put me on her lap. And the person next to her bought her out to put a Jewish child on her lap. And I was thinking to myself, that was the first time I really realized something is very wrong. That what happened to me all of a sudden in the last few weeks, that I can't even sit on her lap. So it's, I remember those things. It's not that anybody told me because I was there. So I'm aware. I tried to bring up my kids without pushing the Holocaust on them. They always knew that it happened, and each appropriate, whatever they could understand. But I always talked about it. I mean, I know we have relatives here in Cleveland, and at one point I checked the watch, actually. It took about 10 minutes for, small talk and whatever, people came over, and then the Holocaust. So we talked about it. We did not hide it. Unfortunately, most people didn't want to know. I was always surprised when I went to high school. There were 3 of us at Heights High, all Holocaust survivors. And nobody bothered finding out what happened. Now, I don't know if they were told ahead of time not to bother us. I don't know. But they knew we all had an accent, and we were new in the school system. But at work, nobody ever wanted to talk about it or ask any questions. So until the school started realizing that they need to teach it. And I guess we have to thank Beatrice Rubinski and, what was her name? Can't remember. They were together writing the first Holocaust book to teach the Holocaust. And that's when I started talking.
Helen, how's it impacted your outlook on life?
Well, actually, although I did not understand the politics and I did not understand about Judaism and Catholicism, all the memories that I tell you, except when I was 1.5, are my memories. They have all been verified by Yad Vashem, by the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and even by Shoah, Steven Spielberg's program. The memories are very, very much aware. I was terrified of soldiers. It didn't matter which uniform they wore. One time, American soldiers came. They offered me a chocolate bar, a Hershey bar. It was worth its weight in gold. I wouldn't touch it because I was sure somebody was trying to poison me. And then another one put 3 bubble gums in his mouth and blew them, and then it went pop, and that was a bomb, and I was out of there. I realized that I had never had a childhood. And I had missed out on all the childhood experiences, that I was always an old soul, if you will. Also, that being that I was not given explanations. My parents didn't even tell me I was Jewish. They practiced Judaism quietly in the privacy of their homes when they were all together. But when my father used to take me for a walk on Sunday mornings, if we passed a church, I ran in there and knelt and said the prayers and everything. And then I came out. He never said a word, and we just kept on walking. But it made me, in later years, it made me very aware of the excuse of hatred and bigotry and prejudice due to religion or what they claim. And I think I'm a fairly tolerant person. I learned that in order to try to explain to people what it's all about, you have to talk about it. But I did not talk about it for many, many years because the memories were too difficult. At one point when I was in my early teens, I symbolically took all the memories, put them in a box, put them in a file cabinet, put them in the closet, and closed the door. And when I went to Oberlin, nobody knew I was a Holocaust survivor. I was just like everybody else, which was a joy and a great gift. My mother, unfortunately, started talking to my kids when they were way too young. When I finally found out, it was too late, but I always felt that you don't give all that information to little kids. My kids are very much aware of everything because even though my mother didn't talk to me about it, she talked to them. And when my oldest granddaughter was in Sunday school, maybe about 10, 12 years ago, she asked if I would come and speak. And I thought, okay, it's time. I have an obligation for the 1.5 million children who did not survive. I need to be their spokesperson.
So it took your granddaughter pushing you or asking you.
Yes.
And that was about 10 years ago, you said?
More than that, maybe 12. Yeah.
And I know you speak many times normally in person at the Maltz Museum and other places. And Erika, when did you start speaking? What you mentioned Leatrice Rabinsky, which I know is was a pioneer in Holocaust education in Cleveland. But was it her that asked you?
B. Stadler, I got.
Oh yeah, B. Stadler, yeah.
Okay.
Was it Leatrice or B that asked you to speak? No,
actually, no. The first time I actually spoke in a school when I retired. See, that was a part of the problem. While we were working, we could not go to schools because it was the same time. But one of my friends who was a teacher at Kenston High School asked me to speak to her group. She was teaching a Holocaust class. She had a whole semester class in the school system. And so I went to talk to her class, and then other people found out. And of course, Leatrice asked me a few times in different places, either at Heights or elementary school or at Siegel College, because she taught all these places. And then, word gets out and people call me, and that's, at this point, I could be speaking practically every day.
Well, we're glad you still tell your story as much as you do. And we just got an attendee who's commenting on your beautiful wallpaper and how it's such a contrast. The sunny wallpaper is such a contrast to your story, but I actually think it represents your spirit and your positive energy despite your experiences. Helen, we have somebody who's asked as well, if you were able to forgive your mom. You mentioned that, you know, you lost trust, or you felt that, you know, people weren't to be trusted. Were you able to forgive your mom after she left you in hiding with the family?
You have to understand that I wasn't even 3 years old when she left. So my understanding was at a very elementary level. And, you know, eventually I learned that she had given me to these people to try to make sure that she saved my life. My hair was light. I was a little kid with a cross, you know, that I was wearing. I had a much better chance of surviving than with her. But you can't quite explain that to a 3-year-old. So eventually I did learn that. The truth of the matter is, though, that my ability to trust is not 100%, and it will never be. That was too deep a trauma to negate what had happened. I'm fairly trustworthy of most people, but never 100%. And I don't think it's possible. And I think it's understandable.
Absolutely, absolutely understandable. Erika, what about trust for you? Is that a challenge? Do you have a hard time, difficult time trusting people at all?
No, I'm gullible. No, I believe people when they tell me something. I believe that, and it goes both ways. When they say something bad, then I know they're gonna do it, and that's mostly in politics. When they say something that's outrageous, and you would think that no, never, but I believe it. I believe it, and it turns out to be true. No, I do trust people, and fortunately, the fact that both my mother and father survived made a big difference in my outlook of life, because I was always with them. I mean, I was never separated from my mother, except for that one day when she had to report to that sporting arena. But beyond that, I was always with her. I was never alone, which made a big difference. And so I was brought up by them and not other people. And I didn't have to fend for myself like some Holocaust survivors who had nobody to actually, no family to bring them up. They were in orphanages.
Yeah.
There was a message there that somebody was asking me a question, but there wasn't a whole question there. I don't know what to do with that.
Well, I think I think the question got asked about your mom. That was the question. And then there was a question also that just came up, Erika, about somebody who's heard you speak before and asking if you can talk about the significance of the blanket behind you.
The what?
The blanket.
Is that for me?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's for Helen. I apologize.
Oh, the blanket is not here. It's a white wool blanket with red stripes. And my father brought that back from concentration camp. That was the blanket that he was going to use to put over his head and walk into the electrified fence. I wrote to the director of the museum at Birkenau, Auschwitz, where had my father gotten this blanket? Did the Nazis give the inmates blankets, pillows, anything? The answer, as they would say, 9. They did not get anything. And this director was trying to figure out where he could have gotten it. The only thing he could come up with was that if for any period of time my father worked in one of the warehouses where the items that had been brought in suitcases of the various people who were no longer there, maybe that blanket was in one of those suitcases. But then again, a friend of my daughter's went to Auschwitz and she saw the same blankets, the white wool blankets, but they had blue stripes. And those were in the bunks or the beds of the Nazi soldiers. So I don't know. There isn't anybody to ask at this point. And as I said, the director of the museum there did not have an answer, but he tried to guess.
Thank you for that, Helen. Sorry about that. So this program is connected, as we started off with the exhibit at the Maltz on RBG. And in a speech she gave on Holocaust Remembrance Day in 2004, she reflected on how lucky she was to be born in the United States, and that the realization that her trajectory could have been dramatically different had she been born in Europe just a generation before, like her parents. And she talks about also how her Judaism inspired her commitment to justice. There's so much about her story that we could cover, but I'm just wondering if there's anything about her life or story that resonates with you and your stories. Erika, I know you've been thinking about that.
Yeah, because when she finished law school and she was unable, she had terrific grades. We all know that. And she was not able to get a job in a law firm because of the fact that she was Jewish, she was a woman, and she had a child. And that was 3 strikes against her. Now, when I was a little kid, I always wanted to be a doctor. And by coming to the United States, first I had to learn English, which was not easy. So my grades were not wonderful in high school, no matter how much I tried. But at that point in Cleveland, it was very hard or impossible for a Jew to get into medical school. So some people were able to do it. If I would have waited long enough, I don't know, maybe I could have. But then I had an uncle who was a physician, and he said to me, you want to be a doctor or you want to have a family? I picked the family. And I didn't worry about going to medical school. So I did the next best thing. I became a medical technologist, which was not being a doctor, but I was working with people and trying to make their life better.
And you still were able to live out your dream.
But I, since I know Ruth Ginsburg's story, I always wondered, could I have waited a little longer or push a little harder and do what I wanted to do?
Well, you've made an impact no matter what, and we're lucky for that. Helen, did you want to answer that at all?
I wanted to add something to what Erika said. My husband had wanted to be a veterinarian, and he was at the University of Georgia. And I have a feeling that there was the same sort of restriction on Jews entering medical school as there were on vet schools. At the time that he was in the University of Georgia, there were 9 veterinary schools. There were 2, as one of the professors said, 2 Hebrews allowed at each school, and that was it. And one so-called Hebrew with straight A's was rejected, but there was a whole to-do and he finally got in. But even though Erika could have waited or done something, I don't think she could have gotten into medical school because of the restrictions on Jews, especially on women, to enter medical school. That's a whole different animal. The restrictions have been lifted a great deal, but there is still a little bit of fooling around when you see the person's application and their religion.
Well, I'm sad to say that our time is almost coming to an end, and it's been such an honor to be with you. And I echo the remarks that have come in about how amazing both of you are. I want to ask you sort of a final question to wrap us up. And that is, we've heard your stories. I know there's so much more to your stories and what you've done and your continued impact, but what do you hope we learn from your story?
Just that it happened. I mean, that it can, if people don't watch out, it can happen anywhere, and it is happening. Different places of the world, different people, but just the fact that it can happen because there are so many people who hate and for no reason. They don't know these people. If they would get to know different people, they probably wouldn't hate them. And that's what we need to work on, to get rid of the hate groups. I don't know how we're going to do it, since it's been going up instead of down. I guess now there are 970 separate hate groups. So that's a problem. And we try to talk to people, make sure that they are not bystanders, and if something is wrong, they should speak up. And hopefully it's helping. Maybe it helps some, but if we can help one person, it's a plus.
Helen?
There was an article where they talked to millennials about World War II. Some of those young people had read Denials, and so they believed that if it happened, it was not to the outrageous numbers of deaths that were reported, and none of them knew about concentration camps. They could not identify them. They really were totally ignorant. Just one example, years ago, when I was in college, I worked on playgrounds. I was the girls' leader. And one of the girls came up to me and said, "Which church do you go to?" And I said, "I don't go to church." And she said, "Well, why not?" I said, "I'm Jewish." And she looked at me and she said, "I like you. You can't be Jewish." Nothing changes.
Well, we will keep sharing your stories. And I mentioned the speech that Ruth Bader Ginsburg gave in 2004 on Yom Hashoah at the Capitol. And she ends that speech with, "May the memory of those who perished remain vibrant to all who dwell in this fair land, people of every color and creed. May that memory strengthen our resolve to aid those at home and abroad who suffer from injustice born of ignorance and intolerance, to combat crimes that stem from racism and prejudice, and to remain ever engaged in that quest." So that's what we will heed her words. And thank you both for sharing your stories and speaking so openly with us. And I will turn it back to Emma at the Maltz Museum to close us out.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Erika and Helen, for sharing your stories and your experiences with us. We so deeply appreciate the honesty and the vulnerability you brought today. And to Sarah, thank you for moderating such an illuminating conversation. I can't speak for everyone in the audience, but I really feel like I learned a lot from all three of you. I'd also like to thank everybody who joined us from home today for our Yom Hashoah program and for your thoughtful questions. If you enjoyed today's program, you can join us again next month for May's My Story program, in which two groundbreaking, boundary-bursting powerhouse women, Supreme Court Justice of Ohio, Melody Stewart, and General Counsel for Sherwin-Williams, Mary Garceau, are interviewed by Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association Director Rebecca Rupert McMahon to share lessons learned as they became top leaders in a field where women and people of color continue to fight for equity. You can find more information on this program and any others by visiting www.maltzmuseum.org. Thank you again, Erika, Helen, and Sarah, and thank you all for joining us tonight.